Hi there. So this is the last item on the agenda, and our session's called Heads in the Cloud, Changing Trends. We've covered an awful lot of ground over the last day and a half. Hopefully what we'll come across in our session is a bit about what's happening and what's going to happen next, what the future trends are. Obviously, finally, cloud technology is firmly mainstream, but the landscape includes private and public and hybrid and multi-cloud and the edge. And how's the cloud going to adapt to these new demands? So I'm director and chair of something called the Cloud Industry Forum, and I've been around in the tech space for a long time. We were talking about mainframes and mini computers when I came into it, so that's a long time ago. But I've been working with cloud and software as a service stuff since before we called them that. And I'm delighted that now cloud is finally much more mainstream. So that's why I'm here. We've got a great panel. So Tony, Gary, Sam, if we start with Tony, could you introduce yourself and your company and just briefly, if we can, please?
No, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity to speak here. Yeah, Tony Grayson. I'm with Compass Datacenters, and I'm running a line of business that we're really focused on delivering full service solutions at the edge.
Excellent. Gary?
Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Bennion. I'm the CTO at CloudM. CloudM is a data management and migration platform for Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace.
Excellent. Sam?
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be with you. My name is Sam Woodcock. I'm Senior Director of Cloud Strategy at 1111 Systems. And what we do is we do three core things: cloud, security, and connectivity. And we aim to provide services related to those different elements for your organization. So that's why I'm here today as well.
Excellent. I think each of the four of us have actually got quite a different perspective into the kind of data center and cloud space, which is interesting. But I'm going to start off by saying, how are your customers actually starting the journey into cloud? Let's kick things off with you, Gary.
Yeah, sure. So we, as a migration product, tend to find people at the start of their journey, more around the operational workloads, so the Microsoft 365 workloads and the Google Workspace workloads. And over the years, we've seen a trend where there was a lot of people 5-6 years ago making the move from on-premise hosted Exchange, a lot of notes and all that good stuff onto Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace. But latterly, we've seen a lot more hopping around the cloud, as I call it. So it's jumping from Google to Microsoft, Microsoft back to Google, but then also a lot of tenant-to-tenant migrations. So people who are performing mergers and acquisitions, doing a lot of migrations, for consolidating one tenant, multiple tenants down into one tenant. So, yeah, what we see people nowadays is we've gone from the journey of 5-6 years ago, people wanting to get on the cloud, and now the journey people are on is they want to optimize what they're doing in the cloud, and then they use other parts of our platform for automation and data management.
How about you, Tony?
I'm going to go back. Previous to this, I spent a lot of time at Facebook, AWS, and Oracle, and I saw this aggregation and the move to the cloud to simplify, kind of their use case. But now I'm, just the amount of data that's being created by some of these companies, it makes it cost prohibitive, to move all that stuff to the cloud. And to be honest, there are some companies that have built everything on old kit, including, IBM mainframes and that kind of stuff that, if your business is working, you're making money, why, don't monkey with it. You don't need a new platform, a new software stack. So I'm starting to see this kind of, move back, disaggregation, but in a hybrid way where the cloud is there for new kind of companies, burst use cases. But if you're an established company, and just because of regulations, whether it's GDPR, GAI-X, that kind of stuff, you're having this move back to more enterprise, more kind of local data centers instead of going to Ashburn.
You see things differently, Sam?
No, I would agree with all of those points. I think what we saw, first of all, was a rush to the cloud first, like everything must go in the cloud. But I think people more nowadays, we talk about cloud smart, where folks realize that it's about focusing on the application, what the application does for your user base, for your employees. Where is the best place to house that application? That's where organizations are now thinking. So that might be in their own data center, it might be in the cloud, but it's about finding the right place to house that workload that's going to basically achieve the business benefits sooner, more efficiently, more optimally, for example. So what we see from our side is often when we engage with organizations, maybe they're a bit distrustful of kind of maybe the cloud initially, and they want to build a bit of trust. Where we see a lot of organizations starting with cloud services is around data protection services. It's often a little bit of a less risk scenario. They can protect their workloads in the cloud. They can do disaster recovery, for example, and they can get a feel for the environment. And then they build that confidence level and progress to potentially housing applications in the cloud. But again, back to my earlier point, they're taking a much more due diligence in that process to identify kind of what is the business outcome, what is the technology that's best going to help us do that, and which environment is going to do that. So we're seeing a much more smarter approach to the cloud from our side.
Interesting. Both you and Tony mentioned data protection. So let me ask a question about data protection and data sovereignty. How do you see your customers handling it? We'll start with you, Tony.
We have a wonderful thing called the Cloud Act, which means the president can order any cloud company to give over any information that's on that cloud without telling you, the user, that your information is being given to the U.S. government. Hence, kind of GDPR and GAIA-X, where, the focus is keep everything inside regional borders, don't push that personal privacy metadata out. And I think the way it's forcing, on a supplier, it's awesome, because now I have to build a data center in France, I have to build one in Germany, I have to build one in Italy. But it kind of, as a cloud provider, it makes it harder, because now the efficiencies of scale and doing a hyperscale data center are somewhat diluted. Like I can't just plant a flag in Frankfurt or, Amsterdam or London and, call it good. I have to actually go out and build in those spaces. So, I think it is forcing, more in-country stuff, and it might be even forcing more kind of the enterprise on-prem or local as well.
Do you see it that way, Gary?
Our main area of focus is more around data protection and people and their data. So it's the end user controls. So who has access to what data? What we found is that by moving into a cloud-first environment, the controls are very different. I think everybody at the start of the cloud revolution thought that cloud was going to magically solve everybody's problems around data protection. Unfortunately, that's not the case. It's just created different problems. So we help a lot of customers with making sure that an end user has access to the right shared folders, the right OneDrive, the right team, but then also as they move around an organization, making sure that the access and privilege levels are adjusted automatically. And then, you've got we're hearing more and more about what do I do with my data for all these customers, these users that are in the cloud when they leave my organization. Gone are the days of sticking a DAT tape in a server room and just performing a backup, because it's all up in the cloud. So now there's, we're helping a lot of customers with how to archive that data to somewhere else. Because the truth of the matter is that the vendors want you to stick, users and consume as many licenses as possible. So I don't think they're going to really push elegant solutions to that problem. So, yeah, we're seeing a lot around access to data when you're in an organization, when you move around an organization, but then what do you do with your data when you leave an organization as well?
So let's come back to you, Sam. What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, certainly. I think Gary made a great point there as you're evaluating cloud services in general, different, whether it's SaaS, whether it's pure cloud. I think it's assessing kind of what levels of data protection are integrated into those different solutions. One of the really big examples that we see a lot of organizations kind of stumble on is they move a lot of their productivity to Microsoft 365, for example. Our organization uses Microsoft 365. It's a great service. But as part of that evaluation of any cloud service, you should understand what is the level of data protection that cloud or service provides. And actually with Microsoft, they're only responsible for the data. They don't actually provide data protection services. So that's why we've had a lot of success from our perspective, providing a backup service for that environment, being able to get the data into another environment, provide a quick way to restore it. But wherever your data sits, whether it's in a data center, whether it's in Microsoft 365, whether it's in Azure, AWS, or 1111, you need to be thinking about data protection, because obviously there's a lot of threats, from security through to accidental deletion, through to kind of power failure. There's a lot of different disasters that can hit your data. So it should be a key consideration for sure. And it's why, for example, we've really focused on that for the last 10 years. But in terms of the data sovereignty piece, obviously moving that data from the primary location to another, you need to make sure that you're adhering to the local compliance requirements, your industry compliance requirements. And obviously there's a strong focus on data sovereignty across Europe and across the wider globe as well. And from our perspective, that's why we actually dedicate specific pods within specific regions, because we know that data needs to stay in the EU, for example, or in America or in Australia, for example. So we regionalize our data protection services so that we can address that data sovereignty challenge, because when we speak to customers, it's often really top of mind, and it needs to be a key checkpoint for any data protection solution as well.
Excellent. Shifting gears, the skills shortage topic comes up a lot, and I guess for your three different organisations, where is it hurting you the most? Let's start with Alex, please. Sorry, Tony.
You can call me Alex if you want.
No, Alex's name is underneath your box, and I'm afraid my brain went into automatic mode.
Hey, it's 4 a.m. here, so I completely understand. Hey, I think we have to be a little more creative than we have been with kind of the talent shortage. It's almost like what the power industry is suffering. All the gray hairs are leaving. Sure, when you're in college or going through the trades, your choices are to work on something fun and shiny, which is the software stack. You want to be the new Meta or Uber or whatever, or you can go work on a data center, and no one really knows what that is. So I think there's an education piece to it, to getting out there and explaining what the role in data centers is. As there's actually a role, but I think there's a huge part to play for veterans in this instance. Most veterans have zero clue about the data center industry, but they're taught to do kind of operations from day one. I think we need to open up our horizon on what we're hiring. Just because a person doesn't have the experience does not mean that they're not teachable, and so you might have to have some apprenticeship program, because really what you get with veterans is you get a will to do a good job, and you get loyalty. And that you can teach the performance, but you can't teach that will and loyalty piece. So I think, getting those veterans into our industry, I think is going to be key for our success, and not only, to help the vets out, but also as an industry as we continue to grow.
It's interesting. It's interesting to get an American perspective on this, and to bring up veterans. I mean, however, there are plenty of military people, ex-military people, working in our industry over here in the UK and Europe as well.
I think we tend to over-rotate on America, and I think that's a huge problem. I think there's veterans from every single country that could be looking for that kind of work. And to be honest, we're all trained the same way. We're all taught to follow orders. We're all taught to follow SOP. You don't get points for, being creative on how you're going to do some kind of, any kind of procedure and everything. So I think we need to start thinking globally and remember that there's other militaries out there.
So what kind of skills shortages are hitting your company, Gary?
So obviously we're a software development company. So there's always been the ongoing skill shortages around .NET developers, Java developers. Now we're using a lot of front-end technology like React, so seeing challenges in that area. But I think what we're doing, or what we've actively done over the past 3 years, pre-pandemic, we have a dispersed team, but we primarily try to hire in the northwest of England. Just so we could try and get people together to do planning sessions and workboard sessions. But over the past few years, we've really changed that to be remote first. So we have teams and individuals all over Europe, and we're hiring in the US at the moment as well. And that's really helping with the skill shortage. If you get less caught up on location and more caught up on skill set and capability, then we're finding that's making it less of a challenge than I think it would have been if we'd have stuck with the location restrictions, which we were self-inflicting on ourselves, to be honest. So, and with all the good tech out there now, there's not really any reason why you can't go remote first, and that's what we've chosen to do as a company. I think in our customers, on the flip side, away from engineering, I think we're seeing a lot of customers create more digital workspace operation teams. So it might be a Google Workspace operational team or a Microsoft 365 operational team. And I still think it's not a skill shortage, but I think some customers are finding it hard to find real high level knowledge, because I think there's still a lot of learning to be done around the effective operations and administration in the digital workspace arena as well.
How about you, Sam?
Yeah, one of the core areas that we focus on from our perspective, alongside that data protection element that I mentioned, was around providing security services to organizations. Obviously, if you turn on the news every day, every week, every month, you see some form of security attack or some security threat that's kind of impacting a variety of different industries and things like that as well. So obviously, to combat that, organizations are looking for really to have best-in-class security technologies, but also best-in-class security personnel to interpret that technology and ultimately secure their organization. So that's been a strong focus that we've seen for a lot of organizations, is that focus on how do I secure my applications, how do I secure my data. The data is everywhere, the apps are everywhere as well. So if you actually look at that space in terms of kind of staffing and experience and folks actually specialized in that space, there is a really big skill shortage in terms of security people, security analysts, security personnel. In fact, in the US alone, I think there's a huge supply demand issue rate. I think it's about 70%. A lot of job openings, but a lot less people to fill those job openings as well. So for us, obviously, we also operate our own security operations center globally. And so that's a challenge for any organization, providing kind of the expertise in each of those different locations to help service our customers. And so I think why I mentioned that is that there are skill shortages. So that I think leads organizations to focusing on how can I maybe work with a service provider or a managed services provider to actually take that expertise that they have already built to solve the outcome that I'm looking for. And we're seeing a big trend in the cloud towards identifying where an organization has expertise and how do I work with the organization to get to the outcome. And we see that across data protection, security, and connectivity as well.
Excellent. Now, you mentioned security. We'll get into security in a bit more depth in a little while, but Gary mentioned the digital workplace. And obviously, one of the different things about the time we're living in now is, post-COVID and the last kind of 3 years that we've all lived through, suddenly forced everybody onto remote working and using different apps, and we didn't have the time to plan it in a nice controlled 6, 9, 12-month project. We needed it by next Friday. So if we start with you, Gary, that kind of shift to the digital workplace, how have you been helping your customers with that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, David. So you've got it completely right. At the start of the pandemic, there was a lot of urgency, break fix scenarios like, crikey, we've got to keep functioning here as a business. I think we saw a massive uptake in people adopting Microsoft 365 because they already had the licenses. It was all in their E5 SKU, so it was the least path of resistance. On the Google Workspace side, I think that actually damaged some of Google's momentum in a way, because to switch to Google Workspace is more of a digital transformation project. It needs more time, more planning. So that's what we saw. What we're seeing now, 3 years or so later, is people looking to really do two things. The theme is optimization. So people are now looking at, and customers are looking at, how do I automate my onboarding and offboarding better? How do I manage my licensing better? How do I provide better data protection? So it's all about making what they did in a hurry better now that there's a little bit more breathing space. Also seeing in the migrate part of what we do, a lot of people moving data that they just didn't have time to move into SharePoint or Google Drive from on-premise file shares as well. So I've got a lot of what I'd call housekeeping migrations going on at the minute as well. So in summary, it's housekeeping migrations and it's getting more out of the cloud digital workspace now that you're in it.
That forced shift to the digital workplace, Tony, how did it fit you? How did it hit you?
If you go back to Oracle, maybe build the Zoom network in short time frame to kind of make that happen. But I think it's I think it's something that companies are still struggling with right now. 3 years in, the teams have come together based off Zoom and Google without really, coming together. And, how does that really affect the team dynamic? How does it affect the production? I think that's something that we probably need to take another look at. And just, it's easy to sit there and say, yeah, you can work from home, but you do lose the water cooler talk. You do lose, I feel like I have to try twice as hard, to be honest, to keep up to date with things, just being as a remote worker. And I, to be honest, I have to travel a lot more, at least for me, my home company is down in Dallas. So it's a lot of travel from Seattle to Dallas. So I think, I think it's just, there's ways to do it, but I'd be super curious to know, and I don't have the data on this at all, how much data has been actually made because of COVID and because we aren't working together. Are we creating 50 different versions of the same PowerPoint just because we're all dispersed? I don't know. But I tell you, I feel like I did miss my calling on the software side. If I could have made some kind of digital whiteboard that actually worked, I think I'd be a millionaire and retired right now. I think I miss my whiteboard.
Interesting. How about you? Yeah, you, Sam?
Yeah, so as 1111, us being a cloud company, we were pretty ready for the remote working. We all shifted to that remote work model and did that pretty well. But obviously, I think Gary mentioned and others have mentioned that because of the rush to do that, they moved successfully, but maybe didn't have the most optimal experience. So what we see from a lot of organizations is them going back now where they have a little bit more time, a lot more breathing room to identify, hey, was that the right place to house that application, to house that service, to house that data? What does cost look like in that environment? What does data protection look like in that environment? What does security look like? What does connectivity look like? And can I do that now? I have a bit more time to now plan that out and actually optimize that whole experience. And so that's generally a theme that we're seeing a lot of the time is, how do I optimize what I have? Do I need to shift that somewhere else to have a better experience? And so that's why we work with a lot of organizations. We have tool sets to actually understand things like resource consumption, compatibility, connectivity, and optimal connectivity as well, so that we can recommend kind of maybe where that should now live, or identifying gaps that weren't kind of checked off as that rush happened to move to a certain environment. We can actually address and actually say, hey, we've got a great solution for this specific piece of the puzzle, to make sure that they have now mission critical data everywhere. They have the level of data protection that they need to actually do business and continue to operate and have great quality of service as well. So yeah, optimization is something we're seeing now as a trend post the major elements of the COVID pandemic as well.
Interesting. Tony mentioned the doing it right and doing it wrong, and collaboration, and virtual. Just an interesting story. I work a lot with NHS England on helping them with collaboration solutions. Right at the start of the pandemic, they put together a thing called Analyst X, which is a kind of a collaboration space for data scientists and data analysts and people with data and people with problems to get together and talk about it and try and find innovative solutions. And they expected 50 or 60 people to turn up in the first month, and 1,000 did, and then 1,000 more each month thereafter, and it's still growing. It's interesting. Getting people together can be done right and can be useful. But one thing I'll also say is that I've got a ton of questions for our three experts here. If anyone from the audience wants to fire in questions, please do, and I'll get those in rather than my list. Sam mentioned the security issues, and I hear a lot of talk about basic security around identity and zero trust. Tell me about the challenges that those security kind of issues are giving us. And start with you, Tony. Start with you, Sam.
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, again, apps and data are simply everywhere. And I think there's a lot of technologies out there that can help customers actually solve for security challenges. I think there's over 3,500 different security technologies and vendors. That's really, really complex to find the right technology that's actually going to help you achieve better security for your organization. So we've seen that, but we also see a lot of kind of configuration challenges managing a variety of technologies, often to kind of adopt a security framework like NIST, for example, in the United States, which is a kind of a 5-step framework. You need to maybe use multiple different vendor technologies and security solutions, and that can be very challenging to manage. And you're getting a lot of noise from that software and that technology. And I think technology is great for helping with security, but unless you have expertise, you can't really kind of identify, hey, this is a thing I really need to focus on to improve the security of my organization. So I think in terms of security and complexity, I think that's, again, why we're seeing a trend towards kind of organizations trying to reach out and see who can help them not only deploy technology, but actually have eyes on that technology so that they can improve security. So that's something that we've seen is folks are looking to optimize the security piece as well and really kind of cut down the number of technologies that they have, but ultimately have somebody who's there 24/7, 365 taking proactive action over alerts that are coming in, because there's a lot of alerts that we see on a daily basis. I think the average for organizations is around 10,000 security alerts they're seeing across all of these different clouds and all these different services, and actually only 4% are what you should really be focused on. So it's about, again, technology, but allowing the organization to focus and actually resolve some of those challenges as well.
What's your perspective, Tony?
On the physical, I come from the physical infrastructure, so I think it's more of a focus on the physical infrastructure. And I think there's a gap in the way we do our physical infrastructure. And I think, we tend to think in terms of data centers that I have a fence line and no one can get inside the fence line, but there's a network that transfers to the fence line. And to be perfectly frank, I think if I'm honest, I could take down all Ashburn by just going to 3 manholes and torching them. And so it doesn't really matter that you had all your protection at your fence line. No one knows who owns the data center. I mean, I think we really need to start thinking about defense in depth from the physical side, but also, looking towards the future. How does quantum computing relate to your encryptions right now? Because I can guarantee it's probably not going to work. And I don't think we're really thinking that far ahead. And we're still trying to solve, how we're doing our SSO or any of kind of that kind of stuff. But I really think we need to be thinking towards the future of what it's going to be.
Quantum computing isn't that far away. I get that.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I'd agree. And there's quantum encryption too, at least in this, this is a state's perspective, at least on the government side. Now, if you bid on a government contract, you have to have some form of quantum encryption. But, just going on the day-to-day stuff, that I'm seeing right now, especially on the hardware space, we're barely getting for that tech to be able to sign in and guaranteeing that that's the right person signing into something that is critical infrastructure.
How about you, Gary? I would guess that your focus has been more around identity.
Yeah, identity and end user applications as well. I think one of the great things about the advent of SaaS and SaaS applications is it's almost democratized IT. But then that brings challenges in, as an IT operations team, how do you put some governance around what people in your organization are using, and what security controls can you put around that? So identity plays a key part. A lot of our customers that we speak to have really detailed strategies around how they're going to really utilize their IDM, not just around SSO, but around how can they use that in terms of governance and monitoring what SaaS applications are being used within their organization. And then on the flip side, when you mention zero trust security, a lot of our customers are talking about that. And one of the real themes that I'm getting at the moment is around ransomware attacks. And we talked about how the cloud's created new security challenges. Well, ransomware is certainly one of those that's right up there. And, we're investigating solutions to, how we can provide ongoing backups of data in the SaaS world, and ransomware attacks would be a real driver for why that's required. Again, unfortunately, the cloud hasn't given everybody the silver bullet to solve all of their problems. There's different problems that we need to solve now.
Absolutely. Part of this sort of shift to remote working has meant that we're dealing with much larger volume of locations and rural locations and places without good connectivity, and edge computing comes into this in terms of shifting power to the edge. How is that affecting your business? Let's start with you, Tony.
So the question is kind of how has the shift into the edge affected it? I think we're getting to my favorite topic, which is what is the edge? And I think, the edge is really based on each single platform. They're going to acquire something different, whether it's a latency or bandwidth. I don't know if we've really have shifted to the edge yet, because I just don't think the network, whether that's, kind of LEO satellites, or is that, kind of fiber in the ground, or is that, 5G, real 5G, not the fake stuff we have. I just don't think it's there yet that has enabled this kind of edge platform to happen. But where I do see it happen is where, things that need to have kind of critical latency to the application. This could be on an enterprise site. It could be at a hospital for AI/ML, that kind of stuff. Or it could just be, moving compute closer to where the data is at in terms of, kind of data gravity kind of piece. That's where I think the edge is happening right now. But I do think, in the States, we're spending right now $77.3 billion on pushing out fiber to rural areas. Those kind of aggregation points will enable the kind of edge platform to start kind of being built. And I think you'll start seeing that happen in the next 2 to 3 years.
How do you see that, Sam?
Yeah, certainly. I think, there's certain areas, obviously, of the globe that have better connectivity than others. And I think Tony just mentioned that, where obviously there's connectivity projects going in to obviously assist with this type of kind of complexity. And I think that's one area that we focus on our side, is we have obviously a lot of expertise from a networking perspective, being a cloud organization, realizing that data, again, is everywhere, from the data center to headquarters through to remote offices, those types of things. So we work with a lot of organizations to take, again, the wide array of different connectivity options and really kind of fine tune them based on what are the throughput requirements, what is the SLA, are there any SLA requirements around latency, for example, what is the bandwidth requirements. Obviously, we're working a lot in terms of data protection, which involves the movement of data from one area to our cloud environment. So we really spend a lot of time trying to identify the right carriers, the right solutions to allow us to move that data to help customers really achieving their recovery point objectives. So that's been a strong focus for us, for sure. But we're obviously seeing emerging technologies or maturing technologies like SD-WAN that obviously can help organizations kind of maybe simplify a traditional approach to networking. And so that's where we spend a lot of time in terms of, hey, what are the requirements? What are the core performance, latency, throughput requirements? And how can we simplify the overall networking kind of layout to, again, simplify access to data and applications, really regardless of where they are. So definitely a strong focus. And I think we'll continue to see emerging technologies and services that we can provide to those customers to simplify that experience.
How about you, Gary? How do you see it?
Well, I think Sam and Tony have covered a lot of good points there. I think my overarching opinion would be that it's an ever-improving situation. And I think it's something that needs to be backed up by infrastructure from governments around the world, really. The better infrastructure we get, the better consistency we'll get in terms of bandwidth and speed and performance. I think Tony mentioned about making sure that you use data locations that are near to you. There is, it is worth always remembering that there is that physical restriction on how far data's got to travel. So wherever you can, I would always locate your data as regionally close to you as possible.
Yeah, good mantra. Good mantra. With this whole kind of complexity of, when Sam mentioned the hundreds of security applications, and most of our organizations, our customers, are using lots of different apps, and we've got public, private, hybrid, multi-cloud. How are you dealing with that complexity, and what about the cost control aspects of that complexity? Let's start with you, Sam.
Yeah, so one of the key challenges that you mentioned, if you're using all sorts of different environments, different clouds, is they all have different cost models. And I think on the surface, a lot of those cost models, if you look at the large-scale public cloud providers, they look very simple. It looks very cost-effective. But I think as we saw that rush to the cloud with COVID, once they were there, they kind of discover a lot of hidden costs, a lot of kind of microtransactions for I/O and storage usage and network traffic in and out of the data center. So the cost builds up. So as we see this post-COVID kind of piece with organizations looking to optimize, cost control is number one. They often can't afford to stay where they are. They haven't got the budget to continue growing in those environments due to that nature of that complex business model. So that's why we're seeing a lot of organizations really focusing on kind of, as they move to cloud for different use cases, that is a prerequisite. I need to understand the business model up front. What are all of the costs that could potentially kind of impact my organization? So we built tools, as I mentioned previously, around kind of understanding exact consumption of CPU and memory, for example. What does the storage footprint look like? What's used and provisioned? What is the I/O requirements around storage? How much bandwidth is leaving the data center and coming back? And building that into a cost assessment. They're comparing Azure to AWS to 1111 to doing it on premises and identifying where is going to give me the best cost optimization alongside the functionality I need. So that's an area we spend a lot of time in, is actually providing that upfront information so that organizations are more informed about the best place to achieve their business benefits really sooner as well. But alongside that, obviously, there's management challenges, there's the data protection challenges that I mentioned, and obviously just all of the prerequisites that go with housing a mission critical app, a mission critical piece of data as well.
Gary, can I ask you to just give a brief extra answer, because I want to try and squeeze in two more questions before we get to the end here. So,
yeah, sure. I'll answer this from a business owner of a high growth software business. Is our compute costs and our cloud costs across GCP and Azure, our main primary vendors that we use, they're growing all the time. I think something that we've really had to put a focus on is putting a process and ownership around monitoring costs, owning the budget. Make sure that you've got somebody who is really accountable and responsible for doing that, because it's very easy for people to look in different directions across the business and ultimately nobody's owning it, and then the bill comes. So that's what I would suggest with a brief answer. Make sure you've got a process and an owner.
Bit to add, Tony, briefly?
Yeah, I think it's more of it's short-term gains or a TCO. And I think you need to understand the total cost of ownership of whatever you do. Vice just trying to think you're hitting the easy button, firing some IT staff and going to the cloud.
Great stuff. I'm actually going to come back to you, Tony, on this next question, because it's to do with sustainability. Are you seeing customers being serious about the sustainability topic, or just paying lip service to it?
So I think, I think it's different in EMEA than it is in the States. I think EMEA has done a lot of good with making definitions like what green financing is. And so, unless you're sustainable, you won't get that interest rate. Here in the States, though, I think, with your ESG goals of 2050, the movement's just not there, because there's no threat to, there's no regulations, there's no, bottom line. I just don't see that sustainability moving to it, just because, imagine if you're a cloud provider and you say, hey, we didn't hit our targets this year, but we're more sustainable. It's not going to last. And no one's willing to, front that extra cost for, a more sustainable kind of physical data center right now. I think the regulations and the financing need to force the issue with these kind of companies. Now, that being said, I do think I'm starting to see the more sustainable solutions at the edge, just because the cost basis is a lot smaller. There's less risk of failure, as from a customer, and the customer is more willing to try that kind of stuff, because it's such a smaller investment. It's a $500K versus $500 million on untested technology. So that's That's kind of what it is. And plus we have a problem in the States called NIMBY, which is not in my backyard, meaning we love the idea of renewable power, but I don't want that wind farm anywhere near me because it ruins my sight lines.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Sam? Are customers asking serious questions about it, or how's it?
Yeah, I think maybe I'm really focused on EMEA. I think we've seen that with the public sector more maybe than the private. Obviously, with things like RFPs and tenders and things like that, often the sustainability questions are continuing to grow year over year in terms of those RFPs. And so I think we're seeing obviously seriousness there. And I think that will kind of permeate, I think, with regulations and the way things are moving as well. Obviously, it becomes a primary focus for a lot of organizations. So I think it's growing, and I think will continue to become a key topic for organizations. And so when we go to market, we bring out a new cloud environment on a global basis. That's one of the key pieces of due diligence that we do on our side around the data center provider. What are the things that they can do to help us go to market and to help our customers achieve sustainability as well? So I think we'll continue to see much more seriousness over time from our side of things.
How about you, Gary?
Well, I know across the time I could talk about this for an hour itself, but it's something I'm personally passionate about, and CloudM is on the route to becoming B Corp certified. But I think there's a willingness there. I think people are starting to realise the extent of the climate crisis, and everybody's trying to work out what they can do to impact and affect that. I think we're seeing the firsthand some of the natural weather events or unnatural weather events that have been going on over the past 12 months or so. I think people are starting to see the reality. So I think there's a willingness there. I think it's just a very difficult puzzle to solve, and it's very complex. I think it all comes down to something Tony said. I think until the legislation is there from governments around the world that make this something that you have to do, we're essentially being left to solve the problem ourselves. And it's very hard to juggle those priorities of, doing right by the planet and then making sure that you're doing right by your shareholders and making your profit margins, etc. So when people are left to make up their own mind, I think it makes it harder for them, and it slows us down actually in terms of coming up with really good solutions to the problem. But I'm a big advocate for Google Cloud. I think Google Cloud is one of the greenest clouds out there. We use a lot of GCP, and there's loads of great documentation around Google Cloud and some great carbon emission calculators, etc. So I think there's a willingness there, but I think people need a little bit more guidance and direction.
They need a kick in the butt, and it needs to affect their pocketbook.
Exactly.
Vote with your feet.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, we're just about out of time. So my last question is, what trends are you excited about for 2023? Who wants to kick us off?
I'm not on mute. I could go. But yeah, for me, I never thought I'd say this, that I'm excited about security. And I think the more we mature in our cloud journeys, I think people are looking for a more robust security posture. And it's going to be really interesting to see what creative solutions we come up with as an industry to what are new problems, whether that's data protection, data sovereignty, data retention. I think there's going to be some really interesting conversations over the next 12 months. And
Sam mentioned the ransomware issues. Totally get that. So Sam, what trends are you excited about?
No, I was going to say exactly the same as Gary in terms of security, because I think at the moment we're kind of on this defensive mode. We're kind of trying to prevent these attacks, but some of them are slipping through the cracks. I think it's time for the security space that we're in the offensive mode, where we're actually kind of researching, we're improving, we're going after the cyber criminals and really improving the technologies and the expertise that we have in-house to really go after and kind of reduce that, right? I think that's a big opportunity. And I think that marrying that with recovery, there's some interesting possibilities to use, for example, data protection solutions to actually instantiate copies of your environment, to do research, to do analysis, to kind of understand where kind of gaps lie. And I think that's a really interesting opportunity to help beef up and improve security in general. So that's a key area that I'm interested in seeing how it develops in 2023 as well.
And we haven't mentioned AI and machine learning and how that can actually help that. So how about you, Tony? What trends are you excited about?
Yeah, I guess two things. I think the first trend is more of acceptance of small modular reactors as a source for the future. I think there's a lot of goodness that's going into very, designs that are based on proven technology that are simpler, that give this, power closer to where the customer's at to help us solve some of the energy problems that we're having right now. And secondly, is something I mentioned before, it's the building of this network of the future with a mixture of satellite, terrestrial fiber, and 5G that will enable us to start building these platforms that will enable my car to drive itself, where my refrigerator orders my food for me, that enables me to place all my prop bets for, football games here in the States a lot easier. I think, that's going to happen. And I'm excited about that.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, I think that whole discussion has covered a lot of really interesting ground and has been a good way to close out the event. So thank you very much for all of that. And we'll hand back to Kaylee.
Thank you so much, everyone. I just want to again repeat the thanks. Thanks for agreeing to moderate, David. It's it's a tough job. I always hate doing it, so thank you very much. And Sam, Gary, and Tony, thanks so much for your insights. And Tony for getting up at such an unsociable hour to join us today. I wouldn't have known unless you'd said so. So thank you very much. That was a great session. And as David said, that concludes Critical Insight for 2022. Thank you very much for joining us.